Way, 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 way. Wake up with Wake.
I went out into the other room, and there was Robert Cohn asleep in the big chair. He was asleep with his head on his arms. I did not like to wake him up, but I wanted to lock the office and shove off. I put my hand on his shoulder. He shook his head. "I can't do it," he said, and put his head deeper into his arms. "I can't do it. Nothing will make me do it." "Robert," I said, and shook him by the shoulder. He looked up. He smiled and blinked. Did I talk out loud just then? Something, but it wasn't clear. God, what a rotten dream. Did the typewriter put you to sleep? Guess so. I didn't sleep all last night. What was the matter? Talking, he said. I could picture it. I have a rotten habit of picturing the bedroom scenes of my friends. We went out to the Café Napolitain to have an aperitif and watch the evening crowd on the boulevard. Chapter 3. It was a warm spring night, and I sat at a table on the terrace of the Napolitain after Robert had gone, watching it get dark and the electric signs come on, and the red and green stop-and-go traffic signal, and the crowd going by, and the horse cabs clippity-clopping along at the edge of the solid taxi traffic, and the pool going by, singly and in pairs, looking for the evening meal. I watched a good-looking girl walk past the table and watched her go up the street and lost sight of her, and watched another, and then saw the first one coming back again. She went by once more, and I caught her eye, and she came over and sat down at the table. The waiter came up. "Well, what will you drink?" I asked. "Pernod." "That's not good for little girls." "Little girl yourself. Dites garçon, un Pernod." "A Pernod for me, too." "What's the matter?" she asked. "Going on a party?" "Sure, aren't you?" "I don't know. You never know in this town." "Don't you like Paris?" "No." "Why don't you go somewhere else?" "Isn't anywhere else." "You're happy, all right." "Happy hell." Pernod is greenish imitation absinthe. When you add water, it turns milky. It tastes like licorice, and it has a good uplift, but it drops you just as far. We sat and drank it, and the girl looked sullen. "Well," I said, "are you going to buy me a dinner?" She grinned, and I saw why she made a point of not laughing. With her mouth closed, she was a rather pretty girl. I paid for the saucers, and we walked out to the street. I hailed a horse cab, and the driver pulled up at the curb. Settled back in the slow, smoothly rolling fiacre, we moved up the Avenue de l'Opéra, past the locked doors of the shops, their windows lighted, the avenue broad and shiny and almost deserted. The cab passed the New York Herald Bureau with the window full of clocks. "What are all the clocks for?" she asked. "They show the hour all over America." "Don't kid me." We turned off the avenue, up the Rue des Pyramides, through the traffic of the Rue de Rivoli, and through a dark gate into the Tuileries. She cuddled against me, and I put my arm around her. She looked up to be kissed. She touched me with one hand, and I put her hand away. "Never mind." "What's the matter? You sick?" "Yes." "Everybody's sick. I'm sick, too." We came out of the Tuileries into the light and crossed the Seine, and then turned up the Rue des Saint-Pères. "You oughtn't to drink Pernod if you're sick." "You neither." "It doesn't make any difference with me. It doesn't make any difference with a woman." "What are you called?" "Georgette." "How are you called?" "Jacob." "That's a Flemish name." "American, too." "You're not Flamand?" "No, American." "Good, I detest Flamands." By this time we were at the restaurant. I called to the cocher to stop. We got out, and Georgette did not like the looks of the place. "This is no great thing of a restaurant." "No," I said. "Maybe you'd rather go to Foyot's. Why don't you keep the cab and go on?" I had picked her up because of a vague, sentimental idea that it would be nice to eat with someone. It was a long time since I had dined with a pool, and I'd forgotten how dull it could be. We went into the restaurant, passed Madame Lavigne at the desk, and came into a little room. Georgette cheered up a little under the food. It isn't bad here, she said. It isn't chic, but the food is all right. Better than you eat in Liège. Brussels, you mean? We had another bottle of wine, and Georgette made a joke. She smiled and showed all her bad teeth, and we touched glasses. You're not a bad type, she said. It's a shame you're sick. We get on well. What's the matter with you, anyway? I got hurt in the war, I said. Oh, that dirty war. We would probably have gone on and discussed the war and agreed that it was in reality a calamity for civilization and perhaps would have been better avoided. I was bored enough. Just then from the other room someone called, Barnes! I say! Barnes! Jacob Barnes! It's a friend calling me, I explained, and went out. There was Braddock's at a big table with a party. Cohn, Francis Klein, Mrs. Braddock's, several people I did not know. You're coming to the dance, aren't you? Braddock's asked. What dance? Why, the dancings. Don't you know we've revived them? Mrs. Braddock's put in. You must come on, Jake. We're all going, Francis said from the end of the table. She was tall and had a smile. Of course he's coming, Braddock said. Come in and have coffee with us, Barnes. Right. And bring your friend, said Mrs. Braddock's, laughing. She was a Canadian and had all their easy social graces. Thanks, we'll be in, I said. I went back to the small room. Who are your friends? Georgette asked. Writers and artists. There are lots of those on this side of the river. Too many. I think so. Still, some of them make money. Oh, yes. We finished the meal and the wine. Come on, I said. We're going to have coffee with the others. Georgette opened her bag, made a few passes at her face as she looked in the little mirror, redefined her lips with the lipstick, and straightened her hat. Good, she said. We went into the room full of people, and Braddock's and the men at his table stood up. I wish to present my fiancée, Mademoiselle Georgette Leblanc, I said. Georgette smiled that wonderful smile, and we shook hands all round. Are you related to Georgette Leblanc, the singer? Mrs. Braddock's asked. Connais pas, Georgette answered. But you have the same name, Mrs. Braddock's insisted cordially. No, said Georgette. Not at all. My name is Aubin. But Mr. Barnes introduced you as Mademoiselle Georgette Leblanc. Surely he did, insisted Mrs. Braddock's, who in the excitement of talking French was liable to have no idea what she was saying. He's a fool, Georgette said. Oh, it was a joke then, Mrs. Braddock said. Yes, said Georgette, to laugh at. Did you hear that, Henry? Mrs. Braddock called down the table to Braddock's. Mr. Barnes introduced his fiancée as Mademoiselle Leblanc, and her name is actually Aubin. Of course, darling. Mademoiselle Aubin. I've known her for a very long time. Oh, Mademoiselle Aubin, Francis Klein called, speaking French very rapidly and not seeming so proud and astonished as Mrs. Braddock's at its coming out really French. Have you been in Paris long? Do you like it here? You love Paris, do you not? Who's she? Georgette turned to me. Do I have to talk to her? She turned to Francis, sitting smiling, her hands folded, her head poised on her long neck, her lips pursed, ready to start talking again. No, I don't like Paris. It's expensive and dirty. Really? I find it so extraordinarily clean. One of the cleanest cities in all Europe. I find it dirty. How strange. But perhaps you have not been here very long. I've been here long enough. But it does have nice people in it. One must grant that. Georgette turned to me. You have nice friends. Francis was a little drunk and would have liked to have kept it up, but the coffee came, and Lavinia with the liqueurs, and after that we all went out and started for Braddock's dancing club. The dancing club was a bal musette in the Rue de la Montagne Sainte-Geneviève. 5 nights a week, the working people of the Panthéon Quarter danced there. 1 night a week, it was the dancing club. On Monday nights, it was closed. When we arrived, it was quite empty, except for a policeman sitting near the door, the wife of the proprietor back of the zinc bar, and the proprietor himself. The daughter of the house came downstairs as we went in. There were long benches and tables ran across the room, and at the far end a dancing floor. "I wish people would come earlier," Braddock said. The daughter came up and wanted to know what we would drink. The proprietor got up on a high stool beside the dancing floor and began to play the accordion. He had a string of bells around one of his ankles and beat time with his foot as he played. Everyone danced. It was hot, and we came off the floor perspiring. "My God," Georgette said. "What a box to sweat in." "It's hot. Hot, my God." "Take off your hat." "That's a good idea." Someone asked Georgette to dance, and I went over to the bar. It was really very hot, and the accordion music was pleasant in the hot night. I drank a beer, standing in the doorway and getting the cool breath of wind from the street. 2 taxis were coming down the steep street. They both stopped in front of the bow. A crowd of young men, some in jerseys and some in their shirt sleeves, got out. I could see their hands and newly washed wavy hair in the light from the door. The policeman standing by the door looked at me and smiled. They came in. As they went in under the light, I saw white hands, wavy hair, white faces, grimacing, gesturing, talking. With them was Brett. She looked very lovely, and she was very much with them. One of them saw Georgette and said, "I do declare there is an actual harlot. I'm going to dance with her. Let you watch me." The tall, dark one called Let said, "Don't you be rash." The wavy blonde one answered, "Don't you worry, dear." And with them was Brett. I was very angry. Somehow they always made me angry. I know they are supposed to be amusing and you should be tolerant, but I wanted to swing on one, anyone, anything to shatter that superior, simpering composure. Instead, I walked down the street and had a beer at the bar at the next bal. The beer was not good, and I had a worse cognac to take the taste out of my mouth. When I came back to the bow, there was a crowd on the floor, and Georgette was dancing with the tall blonde youth who danced big hippily, carrying his head on one side, his eyes lifted as he danced. As soon as the music stopped, another one of them asked her to dance. She had been taken up by them. I knew then that they would all dance with her. They are like that. I sat down at a table. Cohn was sitting there. Frances was dancing. Mrs. Braddock brought up somebody and introduced him as Robert Prentice. He was from New York by way of Chicago and was a rising new novelist. He had some sort of an English accent. I asked him to have a drink. "Thanks so much," he said. "I've just had one." "Have another." "Thanks, I will then." We got the daughter of the house over and each had a finalo. "You're from Kansas City, they tell me," he said. "Yes." "Do you find Paris amusing?" "Yes." "Really?" I was a little drunk. Not drunk in any positive sense, but just enough to be careless. "For God's sake," I said, "yes. Don't you?" "Oh, how charmingly you get angry," he said. "I wish I had that faculty." I got up and walked over toward the dancing floor. Mrs. Braddock followed me. "Don't be cross with Robert," she said. "He's still only a child, you know." I wasn't cross, I said. I just thought perhaps I was going to throw up. "Your fiancé is having a great success." Mrs. Braddock looked out on the floor where Georgette was dancing in the arms of the tall, dark one called Let. "Isn't she?" I said. "Rather," said Mrs. Braddock. Cohn came up. "Come on, Jake," he said. "Have a drink." We walked over to the bar. "What's the matter with you? You seem all worked up over something." "Nothing. This whole show makes me sick is all." Brett came up to the bar. "Hello, you chaps." "Hello, Brett," I said. "Why aren't you tight?" "Never going to get tight anymore. I say, give a chap a brandy and soda." She stood, holding the glass, and I saw Robert Cohn looking at her. He looked a great deal as his compatriot must have looked when he saw the Promised Land. Cohn, of course, was much younger, but he had that look of eager, deserving expectation. Brett was damned good-looking. She wore a slip-over jersey sweater and a tweed skirt, and her hair was brushed back like a boy's. She started all that. She was built with curves like the hull of a racing yacht, and you missed none of it with that wool jersey. "It's a fine crowd you're with, Brett," I said. "Aren't they lovely? And you, my dear? Where did you get it?" "At the Napolitain." "And Have you had a lovely evening? Oh, priceless, I said. Brett laughed. It's wrong of you, Jake. It's an insult to all of us. Look at Francis there and Joe. This for Cohn's benefit. It's in restraint of trade, Brett said. She laughed again. You're wonderfully sober, I said. Yes, aren't I? And when one's with the crowd I'm with, one can drink in such safety, too. The music started, and Robert Cohn said, Will you dance this with me, Lady Brett? Brett smiled at him. I've promised to dance this with Jacob, she laughed. You've a hell of a biblical name, Jake. How about the next? Asked Cohn. We're going, Brett said. We've a date up at Montmartre. Dancing, I looked over Brett's shoulder and saw Cohn standing at the bar still watching her. You've made a new one there, I said to her. Don't talk about it. Poor chap. I never knew it till just now. Oh, well, I said, I suppose you like to add them up. Don't talk like a fool. You do. Oh, well, what if I do? Nothing, I said. We were dancing to the accordion and someone was playing the banjo. It was hot and I felt happy. We passed close to Georgette dancing with another one of them. What possessed you to bring her? I don't know, I just brought her. You're getting damned romantic. No, bored. Now? No, not now. Let's get out of here. She's well taken care of. You want to? Would I ask you if I didn't want to? We left the floor and I took my coat off a hanger on the wall and put it on. Brett stood by the bar. Cohn was talking to her. I stopped at the bar and asked them for an envelope. The patron found one. I took a 50-franc note from my pocket and put it in the envelope, sealed it, and handed it to the patron. If the girl I came with asks for me, will you give her this? I said. If she goes out with one of those gentlemen, will you save this for me? C'est entendu, monsieur, the patron said. You go now? So early? Yes, I said. We started out the door. Cohn was still talking to Brett. She said good night and took my arm. Good night, Cohn, I said. Outside in the street, we looked for a taxi. You're going to lose your 50 francs, Brett said. Oh, yes. No taxis. We could walk up to the Panthéon and get one. Come on, then we'll get a drink in the pub next door and send for one. You wouldn't walk across the street. Not if I could help it. We went into the next bar, and I sent a waiter for a taxi. Well, I said, we're out away from them. We stood against the tall zinc bar and did not talk and looked at each other. The waiter came and said the taxi was outside. Brett pressed my hand hard. I gave the waiter a franc and we went out. Where should I tell him? I asked. Oh, tell him to drive around. I told the driver to go to Parc Montsouris and got in and slammed the door. Brett was leaning back in the corner, her eyes closed. I got in and sat beside her. The cab started with a jerk. Oh, darling, I've been so miserable, Brett said. Chapter 4. The taxi went up the hill, past the lighted square, then on into the dark, still climbing, then leveled out onto a dark street behind Saint-Étienne-du-Mont, went smoothly down the asphalt, past the trees and the standing bus at the Place de la Contrescarpe, then turned onto the cobbles of the Rue Mouffetard. There were lighted bars and laid-open shops on each side of the street. We were sitting apart, and we jolted close together going down the old street. Brett's hat was off. Her head was back. I saw her face in the lights from the open shops. Then it was dark, and I saw her face clearly as we came out on the Avenue des Gobelins. The street was torn up, and men were working on the car tracks by the light of acetylene flares. Brett's face was white, and the long line of her neck showed in the bright light of the flares. The street was dark again, and I kissed her. Our lips were tight together, and then she turned away and pressed against the corner of the seat, as far away as she could get. Her head was down. Don't touch me, she said. Please don't touch me. What's the matter? I can't stand it. Oh, Brett. You mustn't. You must know. I can't stand it, that's all. Oh, darling, please understand. Don't you love me? Love you? I simply turn all to jelly when you touch me. Isn't there anything we can do about it? She was sitting up now. My arm was around her, and she was leaning back against me, and we were quite calm. She was looking into my eyes with that way she had of looking that made you wonder whether she really saw out of her own eyes. They would look on and on after everyone else's eyes in the world would have stopped looking. She looked as though there were nothing on earth she would not look at like that, and really she was afraid of so many things. And there's not a damn thing we could do, I said. I don't know, she said. I don't want to go through that hell again. We'd better keep away from each other. But, darling, I have to see you. It isn't all that, you know. No, but it always gets to be. That's my fault. Don't we pay for all the things we do, though? She'd been looking into my eyes all the time. Her eyes had different depths. Sometimes they seemed perfectly flat. Now you could see all the way into them. When I think of the hell I've put chaps through, I'm paying for it all now. Don't talk like a fool, I said. Besides, what happened to me is supposed to be funny. I never think about it. Oh, no, I'll lay you don't. Well, let's shut up about it. I laughed about it, too, myself, once. She wasn't looking at me. A friend of my brother's came home that way from Mons. It seemed like a hell of a joke. Chaps never know anything, do they? No, I said, nobody ever knows anything. I was pretty well through with the subject. At one time or another, I had probably considered it from most of its various angles, including the one that certain injuries or imperfections are a subject of merriment while remaining quite serious for the person possessing them. It's funny, I said. It's very funny. And it's a lot of fun, too, to be in love. Do you think so? Her eyes looked flat again. I don't mean fun that way. In a way, it's an enjoyable feeling. No, she said, I think it's hell on earth. It's good to see each other. No, I don't think it is. Don't you want to? I have to. We were sitting now like two strangers. On the right was the Parc Montsouris. The restaurant where they have the pool of live trout and where you can sit and look out over the park was closed and dark. The driver leaned his head around. Where do you want to go? I asked. Brett turned her head away. Oh, go to the Select. Café Select, I told the driver. Boulevard Montparnasse. We drove straight down, turning around the Lion de Belfort that guards the passing Montrouge trams. Brett looked straight ahead. On the Boulevard Raspail, with the lights of Montparnasse in sight, Brett said, Would you mind very much if I asked you to do something? Don't be silly. Kiss me just once more before we get there. When the taxi stopped, I got out and paid. Brett came out putting on her hat. She gave me her hand as she stepped down. Her hand was shaky. I say, do I look too much of a mess? She pulled her man's felt hat down and started in for the bar. Inside, against the bar and at tables, were most of the crowd who had been at the dance. Hello, you chaps, Brett said. I'm going to have a drink. Oh, Brett, the little Greek portrait painter, who called himself a duke and whom everybody called Zizi, pushed up to her. I got something fine to tell you. Hello, Zizi, Brett said. I want you to meet a friend, Zizi said. A fat man came up. Count Mipipopoulos, meet my friend, Lady Ashley. How do you do, said Brett. Well, does your ladyship have a good time here in Paris? Asked Count Mipipopoulos, who wore an elk's tooth on his watch chain. Rather, said Brett. Paris is a fine town, all right, said the Count. But I guess you have pretty big doings yourself over in London. Oh, yes, said Brett, enormous. Braddock's called to me from a table. Barnes, he said, have a drink. That girl of yours got in a frightful row. What about? Something the patron's daughter said, a corking row. She was rather splendid, you know. Showed her yellow card and demanded the patron's daughter's too. I say, it was a row. What finally happened? Oh, someone took her home. Not a bad-looking girl. Wonderful command of the idiom. Do stay and have a drink. No, I said, I must shove off. Seen Cone? He went home with Francis, Mrs. Braddock put in. Poor chap, he looks awfully down, Braddock said. I dare say he is, said Mrs. Braddock. I have to shove off. I said good night. I said good night to Brett at the bar. The Count was buying champagne. Will you take a glass of wine with us, sir? He asked. No, thanks awfully. I have to go. Really going? Brett asked. Yes, I said. I have a rotten headache. I'll see you tomorrow. Come in at the office. Hardly. Well, where will I see you? Anywhere around 5 o'clock. Make it the other side of town, then. Good. I'll be at the Crillon at 5. Try and be there, I said. Don't worry, Brett said. I've never let you down, have I? Heard from Mike. Letter today. Good night, sir, said the Count. I went out onto the sidewalk and walked down toward the Boulevard Saint-Michel, past the tables of the Rotonde, still crowded, looked across the street at the Dôme, its tables running out to the edge of the pavement. Someone waved at me from a table. I did not see who it was and went on. I wanted to get home. The Boulevard Montparnasse was deserted. Lavigne's was closed tight, and they were stacking the tables outside the Closerie des Lilas. I passed Ney's statue standing among the new-leaved chestnut trees in the arc light. There was a faded purple wreath leaning against the base. I stopped and read the inscription from the Bonapartist groups, some date, I forget. He looked very fine, Marshal Ney, in his top boots, gesturing with his sword among the green new horse-chestnut leaves. My flat was just across the street, a little way down the Boulevard Saint-Michel. There was a light in the concierge's room, and I knocked on the door, and she gave me my mail. I wished her good night and went upstairs. There were 2 letters and some papers. I looked at them under the gaslight in the dining room. The letters were from the States. One was a bank statement. It showed a balance of $2,432.60. I got out my checkbook and deducted 4 checks drawn since the first of the month and discovered I had a balance of $1,832.60. I wrote this on the back of the statement. The other letter was a wedding announcement. Mr. and Mrs. Aloysius Kirby announced the marriage of their daughter, Catherine. I knew neither the girl nor the man she was marrying. They must be circularizing the town. It was a funny name. I felt sure I could remember anybody with a name like Aloysius. It was a good Catholic name. There was a crest on the announcement, like Zizi the Greek Duke. And that Count. The Count was funny. Brett had a title, too, Lady Ashley. To hell with Brett. To hell with you, Lady Ashley. I lit the lamp beside the bed, turned off the gas, and opened the wide windows. The bed was far back from the windows, and I sat with the windows open and undressed by the bed. Outside, a night train, running on the streetcar tracks, went by carrying vegetables to the markets. They were noisy at night when you could not sleep. Undressing, I looked at myself in the mirror of the big armoire beside the bed. That was a typically French way to furnish a room. Practical, too, I suppose. Of all the ways to be wounded. I suppose it was funny. I put on my pajamas and got into bed. I had the 2 bullfight papers, and I took their wrappers off. One was orange, the other yellow. They would both have the same news, so whichever I read first would spoil the other. Le Toril was the better paper, so I started to read it. I read it all the way through, including the Petite Correspondance and the cornograms. I blew out the lamp. Perhaps I would be able to sleep. My head started to work. The old grievance. Well, it was a rotten way to be wounded and flying on a joke front like the Italian. In the Italian hospital, we were going to form a society. It had a funny name in Italian. I wonder what became of the others, the Italians. That was in the Ospedale Maggiore in Milano, Padiglione Ponte. The next building was the Padiglione Zonda. There was a statue of Ponte, or maybe it was Zonda. That was where the liaison colonel came to visit me. That was funny. That was about the first funny thing. I was all bandaged up, but they had told him about it. Then he made that wonderful speech. You, a foreigner, an Englishman, any foreigner was an Englishman, have given more than your life. What a speech. I would like to have it illuminated to hang in the office. He never laughed. He was putting himself in my place, I guess. Que mala fortuna! Que mala fortuna! I never used to realize it, I guess. I try and play it along and just not make trouble for people. Probably I never would have had any trouble if I hadn't run into Brett when they shipped me to England. I suppose she only wanted what she couldn't have. Well, people were that way. To hell with people. The Catholic Church had an awfully good way of handling all that. Good advice, anyway. Not to think about it. Oh, it was swell advice. Try and take it sometime. Try and take it. I lay awake thinking, and my mind jumping around. Then I couldn't keep away from it, and I started to think about Brett, and all the rest of it went away. I was thinking about Brett, and my mind stopped jumping around and started to go in sort of smooth waves. Then all of a sudden I started to cry. Then after a while it was better, and I lay in bed and listened to the heavy trams go by and way down the street. And then I went to sleep. I woke up. There was a row going on outside. I listened, and I thought I recognized a voice. I put on a dressing gown and went to the door. The concierge was talking downstairs. She was very angry. I heard my name and called down the stairs. "Is that you, Monsieur Barnes?" the concierge called. "Yes, it's me." "There's a species of woman here who's waked the whole street up. What kind of a dirty business at this time of night? She says she must see you. I've told her you're asleep."